The legend of the Flying Dutchman is a mysterious tale that dates all the way back to some point in the 17th century Golden Age. It tells the tale of a ghost ship sailing the seas and never able to reach port, wandering aimlessly with its ghostly crew. In the legends of the old briny deep, any ship that catches sight of this wandering apparition is doomed to befall a harrowing end, the sight being an omen of the end. But even so, as the tale would age with the coming centuries, we would see it adapted to so many different pieces of media. Movies, video games, comic books, and so many more would see different retellings or even just references to the legend of the Flying Dutchman. However, none would do it quite like SpongeBob SquarePants did. See, in SpongeBob lore, the Flying Dutchman isn't a ship, however, it's an actual ghost. As a matter of fact, in his spectral state, he almost serves as kind of the devil to the residents of Bikini Bottom. He's the one responsible for collecting their souls for eternity as a form of payment for their wrongdoings, of which he is the judge, jury, and executioner. The first time that we would hear the Flying Dutchman referenced would be in the Season 1 episode, Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. In this episode, we would see a comic book that would tell the story of the Flying Dutchman's ghost. It's a rather simple one. The Dutchman passed away, and instead of a funeral, they used his body as a window display. As a result, he haunts the seven seas because he was never laid to rest. Now, in this episode, it's used as a simple story to lead SpongeBob and Patrick to the fact that they need to lay Squidward to rest. However, this simple cameo would foreshadow the coming of a being so sinister that you could never fathom. Just a few episodes later, we would be treated to the first ever SpongeBob SquarePants holiday special. That would be the Halloween episode Scaredy Pants. You know, the one where SpongeBob is upset that he isn't scary, so he has Patrick help turn him into the ghost of the Flying Dutchman with a good old shave, a sheet, and some wooden clogs. By the end, though, the Dutchman catches wind of SpongeBob's costume and ends up eternally offended at not only the residents of Bikini Bottom for repeatedly dressing up like him every Halloween, but especially SpongeBob for approaching it so poorly. Now, sure, he removes the costume and is completely traumatized by SpongeBob's exposed brain, but beyond that layer of fear, this episode also showed us that the Dutchman has some feelings. He takes himself seriously, and the fact that anyone would besmirch his good name really sets him off. I mean, on top of that, his whole existence of haunting everyone is because they didn't respect him to begin with. What's really interesting, though, is considering the foundation they laid originally about why he does the things he does and how it would change over time. Progressing from Scaredy Pants, we saw him very briefly at the end of the episode Arg, which was about SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs finding the Flying Dutchman's treasure. We also saw him in the Season 2 episode Your Shoes Untied, when SpongeBob begs him to help him tie his shoes. This one was really interesting because it kind of showed us the light-hearted side of the Flying Dutchman for the first time. He did just a tiny bit in the last few episodes of Arg, but this was the first one with a full segment of him just kind of being a goofball. From there, though, would come the episode Shanghaied, which would be his first major role as a character. This one would see Dutchie forcing SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward to be a part of his ghostly crew, and, well, they really just cause all sorts of problems. It's interesting to note that the Flying Dutchman's ship doesn't really seem to have a name in this episode, which, personally, I kind of find odd considering that he himself is named after a famous ship. Even more interesting, though, is how we would see the Dutchman presented in the episode after this. None other than born-again Krabs. This would be the episode that put a new spin on the Flying Dutchman. In this one, Mr. Krabs has a near-death experience, and as a result, the Flying Dutchman comes for his soul to take him to Davy Jones's locker for all of his wrongdoings. This episode officially sealed his fate as more or less the devil of Bikini Bottom. The Flying Dutchman had previously targeted people who disrespected or wronged him personally. However, in this one, he's coming here to claim Mr. Krabs' soul for things that the Dutchman didn't really have much to do with. What's interesting about the Flying Dutchman's character is that by this point, it's evident that consistency has gone completely out the window. One episode he's mad about not being laid to rest, the next he's mad about people dressing up like him, now he's just here to claim Mr. Krabs' soul for being a bad person. It's very interesting to see how this random character, named after a ghostly ship, ended up essentially being a filler for any time they needed a ghost character or a bad guy to pin things on that wasn't Plankton. Another really odd example of his character changing would be in the episode Money Talks. This one would see the Flying Dutchman granting a wish for Mr. Krabs in exchange for his soul. This right here is just really odd to me because it's already been established that apparently the Dutchman has pre-existing rights to Mr. Krabs' soul. Furthermore, it's also odd because we've never seen souls used as bargaining chips in this show. It's always been implied that from the start, the Flying Dutchman is going to take your soul if he wants it, and there's nothing you can do about it. With that being said though, the ending of this one revealed that Mr. Krabs had sold his soul to a bunch of other beings, as well as SpongeBob previously, so by all means, maybe this isn't a Dutchman-specific ability. I also find it odd though that the episode he appeared in after this, SpongeBob SquarePants vs. the Big One, he's portrayed in kind of a less powerful light. This one would actually see the Flying Dutchman grocery shopping as if he were a normal person, just kind of living his everyday life. Later on in this one too, we see the Dutchman getting knocked down to Davy Jones's locker, where he gets tortured by Davy Jones himself with his socks. Now, as much as this is a tongue-in-cheek gag, it cements for us that the Flying Dutchman isn't the end-all be-all of the afterlife for Bikini Bottom. Like, sure, in Born Again Krabs, we would see Davy Jones's locker, but it's not necessarily implied that Davy Jones exists or is in charge of things around here. The Dutchman is the one bringing Mr. Krabs there in that episode, so we don't really get much on old Davy Boy himself. In this episode, though, the Flying Dutchman ends up being put in a position that shows us how Davy Jones is actually more powerful than the Dutchman. For once, our view on this omnipotent evil ghost was kind of softened as we saw that he actually does have some weaknesses other than not being able to tie shoes. Fast forwarding from there, we would see Dutchie reappear yet again in the episode The Curse of Bikini Bottom. In this one, interestingly enough, SpongeBob and Patrick are responsible for the Flying Dutchman losing his beard, which is a huge part of his identity. As a result, he forces them to become ghosts in a curse that lasts until his beard grows back. Now, I find this one interesting because before this, we hadn't seen him turn anyone into a ghost. Like we talked about, he's forced SpongeBob and his friends into being a part of his ghostly crew, but they didn't actually get turned into ghosts. This just kind of makes me wonder, if he had the ability to do that all along, why didn't he turn them into ghosts back then? But regardless of that, it's also interesting to note that this episode gave us the understanding that the Dutchman's appearance can change, and oddly enough, his hair grows at a surprisingly slow rate for a ghost. On top of that though, this one would also see the Dutchman bringing up the fact that his girlfriend wants to marry him, but he's not the marrying type. I mean, I don't know guys, I thought it was weird enough how far they had strayed from the path with the Flying Dutchman's character, but this is just a really bizarre twist. I really don't know what's more weird, the fact that the Dutchman has a girlfriend in the first place, or the fact that she's a gigantic green monster in a pink bra. Now, if you didn't think that was weird enough though, need I bring up the episode Ghoul Fools, where the Flying Dutchman turns himself into an explosive that creates a void which devours everyone? Or heck, even the episode Shopping List, where SpongeBob and Sandy break into his house to steal some of his dandruff for a top secret ingredient for the Krabby Patty. Most recently, we would see him in The Ghost of Plankton, where he plays the role of a ghostly mentor for Plankton, teaching him how to be a ghost and perform his ghostly duties. All in all, it's just so odd to take in the Flying Dutchman's evolving character. However, I do want to bring up one episode that would be a saving grace to a degree. That would be The Legend of Boo-Kini Bottom. Now, on one hand, it was super weird that the animation of this episode was very different from the show's traditional animation, With that being said though, despite the visual overhaul, the episode would be centered around the Flying Dutchman attempting to scare SpongeBob on Halloween. Now, in comparison to the past, SpongeBob isn't a huge scaredy pants anymore, as Patrick convinced him that Halloween is funny, so he just laughs at everything. In the process of the Dutchman trying to scare SpongeBob, he steals the souls of SpongeBob's friends, leaving him responsible for saving them. By the end, we would see things come almost full circle to the original Halloween special, as the Flying Dutchman ends up taking a peek into SpongeBob's brain and is absolutely horrified by the sight. This time, it wasn't the sight of SpongeBob's brain, it was the sight of what lives in his brain. But nevertheless, the context really leads this moment to feel like a full circle moment in my eyes, and I really appreciate that. But what do you guys think? Now that I've presented how this character changed, I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, massive shout out to the true 90s kids on Patreon. You guys make my world go round, and I appreciate you more than words could ever say. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and give a little bit of praise to the algorithm in hopes that it pushes this one to everyone else. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow for another video. Peace.